Our presidents have come from different parties and different backgrounds throughout our history. Still, a common thread has united them: their faith in God. Take a look.
Our nation's first president, George Washington, once wrote in his prayer journal, "Let the world be filled with the knowledge of thee and thy Son, Jesus Christ." In their own way, the 43 presidents who followed have expressed their own belief in God as well. After 2 years in office, President Obama said, "The presidency has a funny way of making a person feel the need to pray." Abe Lincoln said, "As many of you know, I've been driven to my knees many times by the overwhelming conviction that I had no place else to go." Kentucky Senator and presidential candidate Rand Paul has written a new book detailing the faith proclamations of America's leaders. It's called Our Presidents and Their Prayers.
Well, Senator Rand Paul joins us now from Washington. And Senator, welcome back to the 700 Club. It's an honor to have you with us.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
One of the things I love about your book is how much it underlines we have a nation that's always been led by Christians who express a deep faith in Jesus Christ, regardless of their party, regardless of their personal lives. What do you want people to take away from when they read your book?
Well, I think some people, particularly in modern times, have mistaken. They say, "Oh, we have separation of church and state, therefore, we aren't a Christian nation, or we haven't been populated by Christian leaders really since the very beginning." And even when I started in politics, reporters would come up and say, "Are we a Christian nation?" like as if it were a gotcha question. And without question, we were founded by Christians. All of our presidents have been Christians, and we shouldn't run away from our history. And also, we should acknowledge that the separation of church and state doesn't mean that we keep religious people out of government. It means that we keep the government out of our religion. And this is a bone of contention still up until this day. We still have these fights with what the government's trying to mandate to Christian business owners like Hobby Lobby. So these are important questions, and I thought it important to make sure the record is out there that all of our presidents have been Christians. They've all prayed. They've all looked to divine providence. And I really enjoyed putting this together with the help of Randy Robison, who actually came to me with the idea.
Do you have a favorite prayer from the book?
Well, I think when I look at all the different presidents, I think it just amazes me that what heartfelt, belief and how they look to Providence, particularly George Washington from the very beginning. But I think when you look at how people, had to go through such turmoil, when you look at just the look on Lincoln's face, and you see how Lincoln really struggled with the war that was going on, and I think he did look for comfort and did pray for guidance, and probably of all the presidents as we went through, Lincoln was probably the most profound.
I think we're having a Lincoln moment these days in the war on terror. Is there any prayer that's particularly on your heart during these times?
Well, my heart, prayer, everything goes out towards, the Christians that are trapped in Syria at this point. A lot of people don't realize there are more Christians actually in Syria than any other place in the Middle East other than Egypt. And they're trapped in the middle of a terrible war. And I've been saying for a couple years now, it's a mistake to arm the allies of al-Qaeda. It's a mistake to arm the people who are fighting against Assad. It doesn't make Assad a good guy. But at the same time, the Christians are somewhat protected by Assad. And I've said from the very beginning, it's a mistake to arm the Islamic rebels that have been fighting against Assad, because that's how ISIS grew. ISIS grew out of that vacuum as they pushed Assad back. I had good friends who were Syrian Christians. I went to medical school with a good friend of mine whose dad was a Syrian Christian. And I remember asking him when I first met him, I said, "Well, how long has your family been Christian?" And he looked at me and he kind of smiled and he said, "A heck of a lot longer than your family." And it's true. We don't realize that so many of the Christians in this area have been Christians since the time of Christ, whereas many Europeans came to Christianity at a much later date. But, I think we need to do everything we can, and I've been part of movements to try to protect and help save the Christians in the Middle East.
It's an untold story. The Assyrian Christians are probably the oldest communion in the Christian faith, and they're literally being decimated today they're on the verge of extinction, where will there even be left as a people? So I applaud your efforts. Looking at today's headlines, we've got terrorist attacks in Paris. The president of France has said this is an act of war. And some in the United States are saying we need to invoke the NATO treaty and view this as an attack against a NATO ally. What's your response to that?
I think that we do have to defend ourselves, and I've been saying all along that we are at risk for people from the Middle East to come to our country. So we need to look at all the programs and make sure anybody wanting to come or visit us or come as a student is not coming here with false intentions. And so that's a very important part of our defense. With regard to how we ultimately can win the war against this aberration of Islam, I do think that the boots on the ground ultimately have to be Muslim boots on the ground, because I don't think they're ever going to have a final peace or any kind of lasting peace where American soldiers or European soldiers or any kind of Christian soldiers are the ones that are actually occupying and controlling the ground land. And so I think you ultimately are going to have those who live there have to be the boots on the ground. There are good fighters. The Kurds are pro-American. There are Sunni Muslims. And we ultimately need those cities that ISIS has captured. The people who live there are going to have to rise up, and we can help. But I don't think ultimately the answer is sending 500,000 American sons and daughters back into another war there.
You've been accused by one of your opponents of being a committed isolationist. You know, in looking at the current situation, are you echoing what Washington said? We should avoid foreign entanglements?
I think we need to be very careful that our entanglements or our interventions don't backfire. So the people who want to call me an isolationist, I would say that their intervention has actually made things worse. I think toppling Gaddafi in Libya, which Hillary Clinton supported and Marco Rubio supported, I think backfired on us in the sense that Libya is now a failed state. There's no government, and actually ISIS, a third of Libya, pledges allegiance to ISIS now. So I think our intervention failed us there. I think the intervention in the Syrian civil war is failing us also. I think ISIS grew stronger as Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and us poured weapons in on the side of al-Qaeda. And I said at the time, I don't understand why we would want to be allies with al-Qaeda in this war. And I said the great irony is we'll be back there fighting against our own weapons. I also warned them that the people they were giving weapons to will never recognize Israel and are enemies of Israel. One group we gave anti-tank weapons to immediately responded and said, when we're done with Assad, we're going to take the Golan Heights back from Israel. So I never liked the idea of arming people who have Israel in their sights as well as us. And I think we've made a lot of mistakes with our intervention. It's not a question of being intervening or no intervening. It's really a question of being very prudent about when we get involved. And our Constitution gives very strong language. It says that Congress should declare war. Congress should initiate war. That means all the people are united. And I think it's been a mistake to give the president so much power to do it on his own.
You've been one of the leaders in trying to restrict the NSA and their data collection. In the wake of the Paris attacks, some are saying we need that more than ever. We need to stop encrypted communication. The French were caught by surprise. Well, what's your response to that?
I think they aren't being honest with us because, do you know, the bulk collection of your phone records, which we tried to reform, it's still ongoing. So even though the bill passed 6 months ago, we allowed it to go on for 6 months. And so right now we do have bulk collection of all Americans' phone records without a warrant. So for them to say, oh, it's because this program was reformed that this attack occurred is completely false because the program continues. In France, they have what we have on steroids. They have a program 1,000 times more invasive. They collect thousands of more bits of information from everyone, and yet the attack still occurred. So what I would say is there a limit to how much liberty these people want us to give up? And I think there's not really a fair exchange. I'm not really willing to give up more liberty for a false promise of security because the security hasn't come, but our liberty has been lost. And I'm also afraid that if we give up our liberty, what will we have been fighting for? I know so many young men and women who have been injured over there. Many of them have given up a great deal, arms and legs, to these wars. And when I ask them what they're fighting for, they say for our Bill of Rights. And I think to myself, wouldn't it be sad if while they're all fighting for us, that we gave up our Bill of Rights here and gave up our privacy and gave up our constitutional protections? So I'm going to continue to defend that, because I think you can have both privacy and, defense. I think we need to look at more records of terrorists. All you have to do is put a name on a warrant. And if I were the judge, I would sign any warrant you give me that has some evidence of an individual that might want to attack us. It doesn't have to be proof. It's just some evidence. But I won't sign a warrant and would never sign a warrant that says, let's look at all Americans' records, because I think that distracts us, but it's also unconstitutional.
Well said, Senator. I appreciate your fight for our personal liberty. The book is called Our Presidents and Their Prayers, Proclamations of Faith by America's Leaders, and it's available wherever books are sold. And Senator Paul, thanks for being with us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.